Fear in the Night was a 1947 film noir psychological thriller directed by Maxwell Shane and starring Paul Kelley and DeForest Kelley of Star Trek fame in his film debut. I thought this was an enjoyable crime story with some interesting twists and turns. I'll give a summary of the film without spoilers and then offer some closing thoughts. Well, the film opens up with a trippy dream sequence as the character of Vince Grayson, played by DeForest Kelley, recounts the details of his nightmare. He's in an octagon-shaped room of mirrors, and he stabs a guy, apparently. And he wakes up and he thinks it's a dream. And he's momentarily relieved, but then he discovers things like scratches on his neck and a strange key. Things that lead him back into thinking that maybe these are events that actually happened. Well, he calls in sick at his bank job because, darn it, Jim, he's a doctor, not a bank teller. Okay, sorry. I had to do that at least once, but I won't do it again, okay? Anyhow, at his office, Betty arrives, played by lovely actress Kay Scott, and she sees that he's not there and tries calling him at his home, concerned about him, but gets no answer. Vince, meanwhile, walks the street with lots of internal monologue as he's just puzzled over what is going on.
I had to talk to somebody about this crazy thing. Betty? I get sympathy from Betty. What I needed was an explanation.
He decides to visit with his brother-in-law, Cliff, played by actor Paul Kelley. He's a guy who's been in a bunch of films I reviewed on this channel. Most recently, he was in Tarzan's New York Adventure. And he tells him all about these weird dreams he's having and how he wonders if they might be real. Now, a note, Cliff is a police officer, so as things get progressively weirder with Vince and his stories, he takes more of a closer interest in this. Well, Betty arrives to have dinner with Vince, Cliff, and his sister Lil, played by actress Anne Duran. And Betty asks Vince how he is, and he lashes out, and in doing so, he bumps some nail polish onto his wrist. And you guessed it, that causes him to freak out and pass out and have another one of his trippy episodes. They're actually really cool in this movie. Well, when Vince wakes up later, Cliff goes to talk to him. He's concerned about what's going on with his friend in these weird episodes. Now later, Vince decides to do a little detective work and make some phone calls, trying to find a place for rent that might happen to have an octagonal room, but he has no success. Now later, Cliff stops by and takes him for a drive with the girls. Now Vince, out of the blue, suggests they go to Solanda Canyon, but he isn't sure why. So at the park, you have Lil, and she's feeding marshmallows to Cliff, while Vince is by himself sitting all glum by a pond. Now Betty goes to talk to him, and they kiss, but he tells her that she should leave him, with all the crazy things going on in his head lately. But suddenly, it starts to rain really heavy, drives them all to the car, and they're driving looking for a place to stay because the storm is so bad. Now Vince is able to give them directions, somehow, to a mysterious empty house. Not sure how he knows about this place. In fact, he even knows where the hidden key is. So they go inside and they all settle down. At this point, Vince goes looking around the house, and wouldn't you know it, he finds an octagonal room. Now, Vince and Cliff, they both go looking around this room, and behind one of the mirrored doors they find some dried blood. Now, Vince doesn't know what to think of it. Cliff seems very suspicious. And later on, over some tea, Cliff finally just wants to know what's going on, and he demands answers. He doesn't buy the whole story that Vince knew all of this stuff from a dream, and he starts yelling at him, why'd you kill him, and so on. All of this to which Vince has no answer. The poor guy.
No.
What were you doing here that night? What brought you here?
I was never here before. I never saw the place till the day when I came here with you and Lil.
Who was the guy you killed? What was his name?
I'm in agony already without...
Are you going to answer me? Are you?
I can't. You're asking me things I can't answer. That's the Almighty, or whoever watches over us at night when we're unconscious.
Who was the guy? Why did you kill him?
Now suddenly at the door there's a guy in a rain jacket and a gun. And turns out he's a detective named Torrance, played by Jeff York. He's been assigned to watch this place since about a week ago, when this house, which apparently belongs to a wealthy couple named Belknap, where the crime occurred. The husband was away on business, I guess, and the wife was found nearly dead down the road after being hit by a car belonging to a Bob Clune character, a guy she was apparently having an affair with, and who had apparently robbed the safe from that house. And it was Clune's body that was found upstairs. So a little bit later at the police station, they look through some of the photos of the victims, and of course, Vince sees him, and this causes him to pass out.
No, I knew there was no escape. I was a murderer.
I...
So Cliff brings Vince back home, and it's at this point that Vince, he's alone again. He's confused and he's in despair. He decides he's going to try and jump out the window. But just in the nick of time, Cliff runs back to save him.
Let go!
So Cliff stays with Vince and talks to him to keep him company, but Vince seems to be in really bad shape here. What is going on? Has he been dreaming everything? Or is he actually guilty of this murder? Or maybe is it Cliff secretly behind things? Or somebody else? Well, look, the ending was pretty cool, and I don't want to give much away, so I'm going to wrap up the summary here. I'll let you see the ending of this great film for yourself. Fear in the Night came out in 1946. It was written and directed by Maxwell Shane, and this was also the director's debut film. It also featured the film debut of DeForest Kelley and also Kay Scott. Now, as far as the story for this film goes, it's nothing terribly deep, but it does have some very creative visuals, particularly when Kelley's character Vince has one of his crazy flashback sequences. The film did a great job with those, and also did really good with transitions from one scene to another. I liked how the focus of the film is primarily on the character Vince through the film, and you're very emotionally attached with the character because you see he's not an overly tough guy, but instead he's just this soft-spoken, passive, likable character, and he's clearly haunted and troubled by all of these nightmare visions. In fact, it's actually the character Cliff, Paul Kelley's character, that brings the tough guy to this crime film. So you have kind of the balance of, DeForest Kelley is a much more soft-spoken, passive character, and then Paul Kelley's character is the much more louder, aggressive, tough guy. It was interesting to discover while researching this. Did you know that Paul Kelley in real life did hard time in prison for murder? I mean, wow. I just discovered that when researching this film. But it is a very enjoyable film. And it does really do a great job of keeping you in suspense the whole time, wondering, what is going on? Did this Vince character commit this crime or not? Was he manipulated? What is the story? And it kind of holds you in suspense until the very end and does a nice job resolving everything. Again, no spoilers. You'll have to watch the ending for yourself. So back to DeForest Kelley. I was reading about this film in his biography called From Sawdust to Stardust. I love that title, by Terry Lee Rio. And at the time of the film, DeForest Kelley, he was fresh out of the Army for only a few weeks. I think he was about 25 or 26 years old at the time. And this film was kind of his first big breakout role. And he's in virtually every scene of the film. So it's really kind of neat to see, with all of the stuff he did later, this role that kind of kicked it all off. The biography also included some interesting trivia. I like stuff like this, about how for lunch every day the crew would pile into a station wagon and then they would head out to eat at the Brown Derby restaurant. And for the scene that takes place at the lake, they actually dunked DeForest in Baldwin Lake in the dead of winter. Oh, poor guy. And for the scene where he's nearly out of a window, they actually dangled him from a window of the 10th floor of a building with people below who were not even sure that this was a film or not. Poor guy. And the film was completed in 12 days for only $200,000. Now, speaking as a fan of the classic Star Trek series, watching this reminded me of my fondness for the character of Leonard Bones McCoy from the original series, as played by DeForest Kelley. You watch the old Star Trek show, you have that core trio of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And for me, it was always McCoy, who you could always easily identify with. I mean, you had Captain Kirk, who was kind of the swashbuckling hero fighting Klingons and romancing alien women and so on. You had Mr. Spock, who was cold and analytical, doing his science stuff. But it was always Bones McCoy that brought a sense of humanity to the space adventure.
Please, Spock, do me a favor, and don't say it's fascinating.
No. But it is interesting.
As strangely alien and futuristic as things were in Star Trek, he was still the character that, to me, felt grounded. It just felt real, someone you could identify with, the everyman character. I mean, here we are in this show, set in the 23rd century, and there's basically a country doctor from the South. I love it. He was a legend. What an amazing actor. Okay, let me wrap up the review. Fear in the Night was an enjoyable crime film, and best as I can tell, it is in the public domain, as there are numerous copies online, and if Wikipedia is to be believed, it is public domain. It is a film with some great visual effects for the time, and it was really great to see DeForest Kelley in his first breakout role. It's a great film. It's worth checking out.